Reads Stationmaster Fallmerayer, translated by Michael Hoffman.
The strange story of the Austrian stationmaster Adam Fallmerayer deserves without a doubt to be written down for posterity. He lost his life, which, let it be said, would never have been a glittering one, and perhaps not even a satisfying one, in the most extraordinary way. He had been a stationmaster since 1908. Shortly after taking up his post in the station of L, 2 hours south of Vienna, he married the daughter of a chancery councillor from Braun, a good woman, slightly dim, no longer in the first flush of her youth. In marrying, Fallmerayer followed not the voice of common sense, but the cool prompting of his cool heart. He became a father of twin girls, and he cared for them with the traditional diligence of a father and loyal official. One day in March 1914, Adam Fallmerayer, as usual, was sitting in his office. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Although the sun hadn't gone down yet, what with the rain, it was already starting to feel dark. Even though Stationmaster Fallmerayer was hardly of a fanciful cast of mind, this day still struck him for some reason as a fateful day, and as he looked out of the window, he felt himself beginning to tremble. In 36 minutes, the express to Murano was due to pass through. In 36 minutes, so Fallmerayer thought, the night would be at hand. A dreadful night. And on that day there occurred the overwhelming catastrophe whose consequences were to transform Adam Fallmerayer's life. The express was already running slightly late when it left the town of B. 2 minutes before it was due in L, because of some incorrectly set points, it ran into the back of a waiting freight train. The catastrophe had happened. Stationmaster Fallmerayer ran along the tracks towards the place of the accident. Railwaymen and firemen and passengers were pulling at the wreckage with any tools they could find. The stationmaster shivered as he stood in the rain. He had the sense that he ought to do something like everyone else, but at the same time he was afraid he might not be allowed to help because he might be to blame for the accident himself. His aimlessly wandering eye lit on a woman who had just been brought out on a stretcher. There she lay, abandoned by the volunteers who had rescued her, her huge dark eyes staring at the torches nearest to her, draped from shoulders to hip in a silvery grey fur, and quite evidently not able to move. Her slim, white hands lay on the fur, unmoving as well, 2 beautiful corpses. Was she perhaps already dead? Stationmaster Fallmerayer slowly approached the stretcher. The woman was alive. When Fallmerayer bent down to her, she said there was nothing the matter with her, and that she thought she could get up. Fallmerayer helped her to do so. He took her fur in his left hand, and with his right he took the woman by the shoulder, waited for her to get up, and so they walked the few paces over the gravel and the rails to the hut of a pointsman nearby. "Just rest here for a minute or two," said Fallmerayer. "I have things to attend to outside. I'll be back very soon." Even though he wanted nothing more than to stay with the woman, it was too terrible to stand before her as a useless idler. So he plunged outside, and to his own astonishment he found he now had the courage and strength to assist and to rescue, to give a command here and a bit of advice there, even though all the time he was thinking about the woman in the hut. In passing, he told the doctor, whom he knew, that there was one more victim of the catastrophe sheltering there. "Kindly examine the lady," he said to the doctor, and he himself walked outside. The doctor came out and said, "It's a minor shock. Nothing worse. She should probably stay here for a while. Can you put her up in your apartment?" Fallmerayer gave the woman his room and his bed. The stationmaster's wife was kept shuttling between her and the children. Twice a day Fallmerayer put in an appearance. The evening after the disaster, Fallmerayer learned the name of the woman. She was a Countess Valievska, a Russian who came from the Kiev region, and had been on her way from Vienna to Murano. Part of her luggage was found and returned to her, black and brown leather suitcases. They smelled of leather and an unfamiliar perfume, the scent of which now dominated Fallmerayer's entire apartment. He slept, since he had given his own bed to the woman, not in the bedroom next to Frau Fallmerayer, but downstairs in his office. Or rather, he didn't sleep. He lay awake. In the morning, at 9 o'clock, he entered the room where the woman lay with her large dark eyes and strong white face, as wide as a strange, sweet landscape. "Won't you sit down?" she said to him, every day, twice. Fallmerayer would not sit down. "Excuse me, I'm busy," he said, turned on his heel and walked out. For 6 days it was like that. On the 7th, the doctor told the woman she could travel. Her husband was waiting for her in Murano. So she went, leaving behind in every room, and most especially in Fallmerayer's bed, an inextinguishable smell of leather and an unfamiliar perfume. The strange scent remained in Fallmerayer's apartment, in his memory, yes, one could even say in his heart, for much longer than the accident. Secretly, he was hoping for news of the woman with every post, and one day a large dark blue letter arrived from Italy. It was a short letter. Fallmerayer quickly knew it by heart. He knew the exact position of each word. Written in purple ink, in beautiful flowing strokes, the letters were like a beautiful swarm of exotic, slender, exquisitely plumed birds, soaring against a deep blue sky. The Countess had signed herself, Anya Waliewska. "What a nice note," said his wife, and laid it aside. The days went by, the months. A couple of colourful postcards winged their way north from Sicily with hurried greetings. Summer came, a hot summer. Then the general mobilization was at hand. Fallmerayer was ensign in the reserves with the 21st Rifles. He was sent to the front. He saw action. He was a brave soldier. He was decorated, was promoted to lieutenant. He was wounded. He was put in a field hospital. He was offered home leave. He turned it down and went back to the front. He fought in the East. He began to teach himself Russian from books he'd happened to pick up. Surrounded by the stink of gas and the smell of blood, Fallmerayer pursued the strange scent of leather and the unfamiliar perfume of the woman who had once lain in his bed, on his pillows, under his covers. He learned the woman's mother tongue, and he imagined he was speaking to her, a woman from a hostile nation, in her language. He learned endearments, sweet nothings, love whisperings in Russian. He felt her living for him, waiting for him. When his battalion was transferred to the southern front, he found himself, because of his knowledge of Russian, seconded to one of the regiments that shortly afterwards were to make up the so-called Army of Occupation. Eventually, he found himself near Kiev. It was easy enough to find out the name of the estate that belonged to the Waliewski family. It was called Solovki, and it was some 3 versts south of Kiev. Fallmerayer felt a sweet and painful clutch of excitement. Fallmerayer had the carriage made ready, and he set off. Will she be at home? Fallmerayer asked himself. Will she understand me? And the closer he came to the Waliewski estate, the more brightly the question burned in his heart. The Countess, of course, didn't recognize him. "I'm Fallmerayer," said the officer. Of course, the name meant nothing to her. "Well, you don't remember?" he began again. I'm the Stationmaster in L." She stepped nearer, took his hands, and there it was, the scent that had followed him for time immemorial. "Oh, you must have so much to tell me," exclaimed the Countess. He told her in the most cursory terms how he had got on. She was pouring tea when he suddenly asked, "Where's your husband?" "Why, at the front, of course," she said. "I haven't had any news of him for 3 months." "Are you very worried about him?" asked Fallmerayer. "Well, of course I am," she replied. "Just as your wife is about you, I expect." "Oh, I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking," said Fallmerayer. He stared into his teacup. She had refused, the Countess continued, to leave the house. She was not about to flee either from her own peasants or from the enemy. Her money and her jewels were, She groped for the word. She had forgotten how to say buried in German, and she pointed to the ground. Fallmerayer said it in Russian. "Well, do you speak Russian, then?" she asked. "Yes," he said. I learnt it in the army." And he added in Russian, "It was for you, to be able to talk to you, that I learnt Russian." She told him he spoke it remarkably well, as though his last sentence had been nothing but a linguistic exercise. But her response showed him that she had taken his meaning. He left, and he no longer had any doubt that his destiny was beginning to fulfill itself. "It is a law," he said to himself. "It is not possible for one person to be so irresistibly drawn to another, and for the other to remain indifferent." "Did you want some lunch?" asked the Countess, seeing as it was midday. "Yes," he replied. The Countess talked about the outbreak of war, how they had hurried back from Cairo, of her husband's guards regiment, of his comrades, then about her childhood. It was as though she were desperately casting about for things to say. He stroked his little blonde moustache and gave every appearance of paying close attention, but in fact he was far more attentive to her fragrance than to what she was saying. His paws were listening, and anyway her speech was scented too, the words she spoke. When they got up, he said he would be taking a much longer furlough in a few days' time, once he'd been promoted to first lieutenant. Where was he thinking of going? Asked the Countess. Nowhere, said Fallmerayer. I'd stay here with you. She invited him to stay as long as he liked. If he cared to stay, there were plenty of rooms. They wouldn't get in each other's way. Perhaps a week after this visit, the newly promoted First Lieutenant Adam Fallmerayer was given his furlough. He went to the house of the Velievskis, moved into a ground-floor room that had been made ready for him, and took his meals every day with the lady of the house. At night, he didn't sleep. Just as he hadn't slept those years before at home in the station building, during those 6 nights the Countess had spent in his room, overhead. Once more he had a sense of her over him at night, over his head, over his heart. One night, it was humid and a good relieving rain began to fall. Fallmerayer got up, dressed, and went outside. He saw Countess Velievska coming down the stairs. She was dressed as if for the day. He bowed silently. She came up to him. Fallmerayer could hear his heart beating. He thought he could hear her heart beating as loud as his own, and in time with it. Fallmerayer said, "Let's walk in the rain. I'll get you a coat." And without waiting to hear what she would say, he plunged into his room, came out with his own coat, and laid it round the shoulders of the woman, just as he had once laid her fur on that one unforgettable night of the disaster, and then he laid his arm over the coat. And so they walked out into the night and the rain. They walked down the avenue of birches. He pressed his arm more tightly around the woman's shoulder and felt, through the stiff, sodden material, the yielding kindness of her body. His hand left her shoulder, moved up to her wet hair, brushed over her wet ear, touched her wet face. And a moment later, they both stopped as one, turned to one another, clasped each other. The coat slipped from her shoulders and fell heavily to the ground. And so, in the rain and the night, they pressed their faces together, their mouths together, and they kissed and kissed. Every morning and evening, First Lieutenant Fallmerayer blessed the war and the occupation. Nothing terrified him as much as a sudden return of peace. He thought of Count Velievsky as long dead, either killed in action or murdered by mutinous communist troops. The war simply had to go on indefinitely. But of course, quite heedless of him, the great and inscrutable wheel of the world was rolling on. The revolution came. Fallmerayer, the amorous first lieutenant, hadn't seen it coming. Even so, the sudden stroke of the hour of destiny roused his sleepy brain, and with renewed alertness he saw that he had to save the lives of his beloved and himself, and above all to rescue their union. A profound instinct told the two lovers that at a time when the whole of the earth was plunged into chaos, the eternal sea must be the only place that would guarantee them freedom. Therefore, the sea became their first objective, and in an excited but confident frame of mind, they drove off. Several weeks later, Fallmerayer and his beloved reached Monte Carlo, where the Walewskis had bought a small villa before the war. Now Fallmerayer thought he had reached the pinnacle of happiness and life. He was loved by the most beautiful woman in the world. More, he loved the most beautiful woman in the world. The woman who, only a little while ago, had been too proud to listen to the voice of her heart and her senses. This woman now had no other aim or desire in life than to be the mistress of Fallmerayer, the stationmaster of the Austrian Southern Railway. Even though Countess Walewska had her Fallmerayer all to herself, she still was incapable of loving for long without fearing the loss of her beloved. For often it is a woman's fear of losing a man that heightens her love and her passion for him. So one day, she began to ask him to divorce his wife and renounce his children and his job. Straight away, Fallmerayer wrote a letter to his cousin Heinrich, saying that he had irrevocably broken with his past life, and that he was eager that a well-qualified lawyer be found to expedite the divorce in his absence. Heinrich's reply came a few days later. 2 years had elapsed since Fallmerayer had been listed as missing, and since he had at no time given any sign of life, his wife and few remaining relatives all supposed him to have died. It seemed simplest to remain silent, always assuming that Fallmerayer didn't run into difficulties over his passport or the like. Fallmerayer thanked his cousin and enjoined him to silence. He showed the correspondence to his beloved. Her mind was set at rest. She fell pregnant. Fallmerayer was beside himself with joy. Then one day a stranger turned up at the villa of the Walewskis, a Caucasian by the name of Kurdzashvili, who informed the Countess that by some providential chance, and probably with the help of the icon of St. Procopius in the monastery of Pokrozhny as well, the Count had managed to survive the dual perils of war and the Bolsheviks, and was even now on his way to Monte Carlo. During the Caucasian's visit, Fallmerayer said not a word. He escorted the visitor out of the house for a short distance. When he returned, he felt for the first time in his life a sharp, sudden stabbing in his chest. His mistress was sitting at the window, reading. "Well, you can't let him find us here," said Fallmerayer. "We have to run away." "I'm going to tell him everything," she replied. "We'll stay." "You're carrying my child," said Fallmerayer. "It's an impossible situation." "You'll stay here till he comes. I know him. He'll understand," replied the woman. From that time forth, they didn't exchange another word about Count Walewski. They waited, till one day a telegram came from him. He was coming on such and such an evening. They went to meet him at the station. 2 guards lifted him out of the carriage, and a porter came along with a wheelchair. He was put in the wheelchair. He held out his long, bony, yellow face towards his wife. She bent down and kissed him. With long, bony hands that were blue with cold, he kept trying, unsuccessfully, to pull a couple of brown rugs over his knees. Fallmerayer came to his aid. The Count was wheeled along the platform like one of his many pieces of luggage. He had to be lifted into the car. Fallmerayer and the chauffeur did it together. He had to be carried into the villa. Fallmerayer took him by the head and shoulders. The servant took his feet. "I'm hungry," said Count Walewski. When they laid the table, they learned that Walewski was unable to feed himself. His wife had to feed him. And when, following a grim, silent dinner, it was time for bed, the Count said, "I'm tired. Put me to bed." Countess Walewska, the servant, and Fallmerayer bundled the Count up the stairs to his room on the first floor, where a bed had been made ready. "Good night," said Fallmerayer. He saw out of the corner of his eye his mistress plump up the pillows and sit down on the side of the bed. And then Fallmerayer left. Nothing has ever been heard of him since.